folks, it's going on about a month and a half now since I've done a video, and things have been pretty busy here. It's summertime, the same old same pretty much with work and whatnot, so I haven't had much time to work on any of my own projects and do any videos, but I figured being a Saturday today, I might as well take it for myself and work on some of my own stuff that I've been meaning to get done for a while. And to start with, we're going to be delving into the WheelHorse D-160 today and doing a repair and startup on this. I have a feeling it's going to be a two-part series, but we'll have to see how the video plays out because there's a little more work to do on it than I figured when I was looking it over last night. So this is a 1975 model. It has the single-cylinder Kohler K341 16 horse in it versus the two-cylinder K-series that they offered, or the Onan B43 that they offered in them too. I think this was just the base model that you can get back then, nothing real special. So it had the single cylinder in it. I don't know if it runs. I know it's been sitting for a number of years now, according to the guy that I bought it from. And the guy that he got it from originally bought it, and it was used as a tilling tractor, and it had a deck. And unfortunately, I missed out on the tiller when I bought it, but I did end up with a deck for it. So, and no, it needs a lot of wiring work. Someone's butchered it. They put some sort of resistor in for the coil. The coil is wired backwards. The points aren't even remotely wired correctly, as you can see. Some of the engine's taken apart. I do have some of the parts here. It's going to need a seat. It's got a new gas tank on it though, which is nice. And the main reason why I bought this was because of the 3-point hitch. And it also has the rear and front PTO on it too, which is nice. But the idea for this tractor was to build the tow truck for moving garden tractors around. Some of you might remember that project that I was going to do with my S-Series errands, but it turns out the 3-point hitch just didn't have the oomph to lift anything, and I'm really hoping this one does, because it's a nice big tractor. But it just needs the usual going through that I give everything, and just needs to be gone over and gotten going again. So I figured it's a good a time as any to do it, and good a time as any to make a video out of it. So anyways, folks, let's get to it. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to be starting with is getting this engine squared away. So pull this carburetor off of here and see how it looks inside. Pretty good catch, ain't it? It's not too bad, it's still fairly tight, just dirty as ever. Alright, so before I go any further with this, I'm going to do something to this engine that I usually end up forgetting to do to most engines that I end up getting going again before I delve too far into it, is I'm going to put a leak down tester on it here, which basically just back feeds air into the engine, and when you spin this over and you get it to top dead center, you can set the amount of pressure that you put into the cylinder, and then this gauge here will show you how much is leaking out. But you'll also be able to hear it leaking out of either the intake, the exhaust, or the breather, so you'll know if your valves aren't seating or if your piston is worn, because it'll be coming out of the breather. And at least that'll give you somewhat of an idea on either how worn the engine is or if your valves are leaking and so on. So now we're on the intake stroke. And the compression stroke. Alright, I guess we went past it. I was waiting for the decompression, but... Alright, so... that is top dead center right there. So it's feeding 10 psi in. And I'll turn it up to about 20, and you can see that I've pinned that gauge now. So I don't hear anything coming out of either the exhaust or the intake, but I can hear a little bit coming out of the breather. So that just tells me that the cylinder might be a little bit worn and the rings aren't seating. But this also hasn't ran for a while too, so if there's no oil in the cylinder, that's not going to help the rings seat, or seal I guess rather. So it's got a little bit of leakage, but not too bad. It's not enough where I'm going to worry about it. Some of these, I've put this on an engine before and you can turn it right up to, you know, 30 or 40 and this thing's still in the low and it's just hogging the air right out of the breather, and that's when you know the cylinder is gone and needs to get rebored. So anyway, since that seems to be pretty tight, we'll keep going with the fuel system and take a look at this carburetor now and see how that looks inside. So before I open up this carburetor, I'm going to go out to the parts washer I have outside and run this through it and just see if I can wash off some of this crap that's stuck to it. That way when I open it up, it's just that much less dirt that's going to get inside of it that I have to clean out. Well, you folks have probably seen me pull these carburetors apart a couple dozen times now, these Kohler carbs, but I figure might as well watch me do it one more time. Well, it's a little bit better than I figured it was going to be. It's wet from the going through the parts washer, but aside from that, there's not too much shellac or buildup inside of it, so I can't complain too much. Float's still good. So aside from just needing to get sprayed down with some brake cleaner to get rid of the rest of the parts washer fluid, and possibly get ran through the bead blaster just to clean up this edge where the gasket sits and clean out the bowl, this carburetor really ain't all that bad. It's actually in a bit better a shape than I figured it would be, for given what happened to the rest of the machine. So since it's a pretty easy cleanup, I'm going to go ahead and take care of this, and I'll check in with you folks after it's done. It's just to save a little bit of video time, and hey, you guys have seen me do this enough, so nothing too new here. Now that I've finished with the carburetor, I'm going to pull the fuel pump off too and split that open and take a look inside. Not too bad. Diaphragm is still pliable on the bottom half. And as for the top, check valves are still moving like they should. The inside is a little crusty, but not too bad overall compared to some of the ones that I pulled apart. It's got a little bit of junk stuck to the inside of it, but not too bad. I'll just take a little pick and scrape some of that out, and then I can put this back together, and this should be a good fuel pump still. carburetor and fuel pump are all taken care of. I was going to delve into the electrical system on this for the engine, but I figured if I'm going to do that, I might as well do everything under the dash also. So I'm going to save that for later. So since I'm doing the fuel system, I'm going to finish taking care of the fuel line and the gas tank on here. Somebody did put a replacement tank on it, so it's nice and clean inside, but it's got some paint flakes in it and just some miscellaneous crap. So I'm going to have to get that blown out and then more than likely end up running a new fuel line, because as you can see, the fuel filter's junk, but the fuel line is also cracked too. And if I can cut this back and it doesn't crack, then I'll leave it on there. If not, I'm going to have to run a new line. I have had these studs snap off before on these tanks on a customer's D series that was here because they were so rusted. And unfortunately, the way they weld onto the tank, they do it from the factory, so you can't just slip the bolts out and replace them. So you have to weld new studs to the tank, which I did have to do. I blew the inside of the tank out with compressed air, and it seemed to have gotten all the paint flakes and dust and everything out of there, so our inside should be good. But I am going to replace the petcock on the bottom because, as you can see, it's not working right and it's just coming apart when you unscrew it, and it's kind of rusty as it is, so I might as well just put a new one in there so I can shut the gas off. I was just going to do a elbow out of the tank and an inline shut off, but this looks a lot cleaner rather than the Briggs & Stratton inline ones that you splice into the line somewhere. Gas tank is all back in and mounted. The fuel line, I was able to nip the ends of it and reuse it. It was still in good shape and wasn't all dry rotted and all that. So I was able to leave that in there. And then the two pieces that were up on the front here, from the filter to the pump and from the pump to the carburetor, were both junk. But I keep a box of used fuel line here that I pull off of customers' machines, along with a whole tray of old fuel line spring clamps. So I was able to scrounge up some parts and some good fuel line, good used fuel line to put onto here. So that saved me a little bit of dough rather than have to use my stock. And the only thing I had to put on new was the fuel filter and the shutoff, obviously enough. So remember folks, it's thrifty, not cheap. But anyways, we're going to be starting in on the electrical now and getting that taken care of. The coil on here is wired kind of messed up. As you can see, the hot lead goes into the negative side and the positive side goes down to the points with the condenser on it. It should be vice versa. And they also put a ballast resistor in line, and they chopped up some of the wiring under the dash. And I know that 5-prong plug on the back of the key switch is also cooked, so that's going to have to get cut off and rewired. And along with the choke cable is going to have to get replaced because it's kind of ornery looking, and I'm not even going to bother trying to straighten that out. And I think the throttle cable might need a little bit of help too, but we'll get to those once we start delving into the wiring underneath. I got my points all hooked up and the points box back on. I put the original set of points that were on this back in. The contacts didn't look too bad, so I figured I might as well just use them. Remember, thrifty. So rather than pull a new set of points out of stock, they weren't fitted or anything like that. So what I am going to do is change out this coil because somebody had it hooked up backwards. I don't know if it's cooked or not because of that. So once again, I have some good used coils kicking around here. So I'm going to put one of them in and we'll see how it does, and hopefully we can get some spark out of it. And just for kicks, before I get too far ahead of myself, I figured I'd check the spark, make sure we got a good ignition components here. Well, our used coil has a nice hot spark, so that's always a plus. So now I'm going to start delving into the wiring on this thing. I was tracing some wires earlier with the meter, and I get an idea of where everything has to go and to get rewired in. Like I said, this plug on the back of the key switch is pretty much toast for the most part. So I'm going to clip that off of there and just put on female spade connectors instead. I have to redo the wire that goes to the light switch here, take out some other wires, and I think that's really about it. It's not as bad as I figured it would be. I also have to put a new battery cable on for the positive and negative side, and possibly redo this solenoid that somebody sort of butchered on there. I think I have another one that might fit a lot neater down underneath this access panel. So anyways, we'll get to clipping some wires and redoing some ends. Wiring's all taken care of. As you can see, the back of the key switch is all squared away. Everything's back on there with new spades. The only wire I did not reuse in the harness was the green light switch wire that ran from the back of the key switch down into the harness and then back up into the light switch. So all I did was just jump it over with a white wire and then taped up the green wire in the harness and hit it, so it's out of the way. I can always use it later for something if I want to. So I got that cleaned up over in there. Back of the dash panel's all cleaned up. I ran my wire over to my coil. That's the only one I had to cheat on and butt connect to extend it a little bit because somebody cut it and I wasn't going to fish a new one through the harness. So that's all done. And my solenoid, I put another solenoid on this, more of a heavy duty one for the wires running down. And I put a little boot on the side here because this brake arm, I don't know how much further forward it goes, and if it hits, I'd rather not have it arc. So this doesn't look as good as I wanted it to, but at least it'll keep it insulated and hopefully keep it from arcing out if it does whack into it. So the wiring is all squared away now. Got my battery terminals on there, the cables that is, and I also found a battery hold down for it. So now I'm mounting up a seat. I did find a good used seat up on the hill, so I have to get that mounted. And then there's a couple other things that I have to take care of here also. I got the seat all mounted up. That went on there real nice, and there's just enough room for it, so that worked out pretty slick. So the last few things that I have to do on this, for one, is I got to pull this front PTO clutch apart because it's hanging up and it's still spinning the belt for the PTO shaft. And worst comes to worst, if I pull it apart and there's a lot of stuff messed up inside of it, I'm just going to take the belt off and let it freewheel for now, because for what I'm going to be doing with this tractor, I'm not going to be needing the front or the rear PTO. So aside from that, it's just going to be a matter of greasing the front end. I have to grease up the steering and make sure that's all tightened up. I finished up my throttle and choke cables. Those are all squared away now. Once I get this running, I can put the air cleaner back onto it. And as for the 3-point hitch in the back, the arms are stuck, the swivels, but I don't know if I'm going to be using those yet when I make the 3-point or the tow truck thing for the back of this, the Stinger, so those might end up coming off as it is anyways. But we're going to pull apart this PTO clutch up front and see how it looks inside. Well, that's all for now, folks. It looks like this part's getting a little bit long in the tooth, so I'll hang on to part 2 till the end of this week. So until then, there you have it.